And that's what I would.
Well, it all gets back to sovereignty, and that's actually what this is kind of coming down to when we're talking about the Greys. We're talking about invading species, even in some cases a robotic species, and we're talking about the fate of humanity, basically.
Yes. You know, there's an article on UFO Digest that I wrote with a detective friend of mine from Canada. We reinvestigated a UFO case that happened at a hospital in Cowichan Hospital in British Columbia. And in the course of the investigation, it happened in 1972, so 38 years later, we reopened it. My friend lived nearby. She became interested in the case, and she found the witnesses, including the mayor of the town, people who had been on the boat when this UFO event occurred, and the nurse, the friends of the nurse who had witnessed. She went to the window to open up the curtains, and when she opened them, there was a UFO floating out there, and it was kind of tilted in an angle, and it had a dome, and there were these two ETs working on it, and one looked at her, and she figured out they were having a little problem with their navigation or their balancing, and they worked on it for a little while, leveled off the ship, and looked back at her, and boom, they took off. So this was written up, and when we investigated it, I came to the conclusion that we are suffering something called UFO piracy. Not only are they coming down and taking biological material and samples and cattle mutilation samples and things like that, but they're also stealing vast resources of water and electricity. There are a tremendous number of accounts of UFOs seen stealing water from lakes and reservoirs, as well as hanging over power stations and stealing the energy from the power station. Or maybe they're using them as rechargers for some of their craft. But if you go to UFO Digest and you, in the search engine, you type in UFO piracy, another one is UFO smokescreen, which is about the control of UFO information that was implemented in the 1950s as a result of the Robertson Commission report. And there's quite a lot on UFO Digest. I've suggested the one about the assassinations, the Black Hand in history. And I think if you study these three, you'll get a pretty good picture of what's going on. We're being, there's a kind of lechery, that's going on. Leche in Spanish means milk, to milk like a cow. And I think the ETs have been doing that. The gray ETs have been doing that to humankind for far too long. And they've always dressed themselves in a credible lie. In the Middle Ages, they were telling people they were, demons and witches and carrying them off to the Sabbath and doing all kinds of satanic things. But basically, it's the same story, and I think that Jacques Vallée really hit the nail right on the head in Passport to Magonia, although he seemed to back off what he had found and kind of went in a different direction after that. But I think that Passport to Magonia is his masterpiece.
Oh, really? That's interesting. Interesting. Good to hear that there was a difference. So he changed his tune, huh?
He changed his tune. Some people believe that he was bought out, compromised, or co-opted. He was at Stanford, during the time that the Stanford Research Institute was doing all that research into psychic phenomena. And shortly thereafter, he came out with these other concepts like the Masters of Deception and the planting of memes and disinformation technology. But he really backed way off the brilliant insight that he had and reports in Passport to Magonia, which is basically that this phenomenon has always been here, accompanying humankind, and that it's dressed itself up in various myths and legends that were appropriate to the culture in which it was manifesting at that time. So in Vedic India, Hindu India, it's Krishna, the blue Krishna, and the gopis and the cowgirls dancing in the forest.
Oh, yeah. It's very pervasive in the Hindu
demigods of Greece and so on.
writings, the Upanishads.
Yes.
There's a question coming in here. Somebody's saying, how come all the ET sightings we hear of are from the U.S.? What is the importance? That's interesting because I don't hear them being just from the U.S. Actually, we hear huge sightings in England and certainly in South America. But how would you address that question?
Well, I'd say that the person has not read far enough in the literature, because the abduction phenomenon spans the world. The first thing that comes to mind, and most recent for me, that's not U.S., is the incident that occurred in the early 2000s in South Africa, with 63 children in a South African school who had an encounter with a UFO and extraterrestrials, and they all tell their stories and drew drawings.
That's
tremendous amount of abduction happens in Canada, which some people kind of bundle with the U.S., but I don't. And I recommend very highly a called BC, UFO BC, British Columbia, .ca. It was run by Graham Conway, who passed away a few years ago. And actually, I have to pay tribute to this website and to Graham Conway because, I've been involved in UFOs since 1956. My little brother, when he was 7 in 1962, was abducted. He told me this of his abduction. He didn't see a UFO when it happened. It was just these strange little creatures, as high as the flower bed was, and who had big black eyes, and he called them like little munchkins, And I was aware of abductions and studied them since 1962. But it's a widespread phenomenon, but I kept my involvement in ufology very secret. Especially, for example, in the JFK assassination era, I was totally immersed in the JFK assassination and bringing that to light. And my cousin Mark was involved in ufology and wanted to get me involved openly. And I said, look, I don't want to have anything to do with ufology. And I've got the JFK assassination, and I don't want it to be tainted, because, But, of course, I believe it, I know it, but I just didn't want to mix the two fields. And look, after all those years of investigating JFK, it comes down to UFOs got him killed. There's a very interesting story about JFK's UFO encounter related by Dr. Michael Wolff, who was head of AlphaCom. And in June of 1963, JFK was on his yacht, the Honey Fitz, off Martha's Vineyard, when a UFO came down and parked itself about 200 feet away from the yacht and stayed there and created panic on the yacht. The Secret Service went crazy. The guests went crazy. Nobody knew what to do. Kennedy was looking at it, and all of a sudden it just went zip, went straight up into outer space. And Kennedy took his cousin and the rest of the people and said, you must never talk about anything about this to anyone. But, of course, his cousin went home and blabbed to her husband. First thing, honey, you know what? Don't tell anybody, but I was on the yacht with Jack and we saw a flying saucer. So I think now that happened in June of 63. And I think that's what really lit the fire on JFK.
Yeah.
But he'd been interested in it since 1947 because, the MJ-12 documents that you asked me about refer to him specifically in item 14 as having been found out by Army intelligence. And basically, he was put on a watch list because he found out about it out of official channels. He was briefed by a staff member, Secretary of the Air Force of the time, whose name was Stuart Symington, a very famous name in recent times, too. Phi Symington, governor of Arizona, is the nephew of Stuart Symington, who was the Secretary of the Air Force at the time of the Roswell crash.
Oh, so, interesting.
Yeah, certain families get to kind of cover the story.
We've got a question here, and then this is probably, I don't know if we'll even have time to go much farther than this, but